Today's guest is Grand Agent, a veteran Philadelphia hip hop artist, community organizer, and founder of Philly Truths, a non-profit dedicated to advancing sustainable Black manhood and reducing community violence through grassroots action. Grand, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, brother. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you so much, Grant. So, I would also like you to add a little bit to that introduction.
Yeah, so I grew up in Philadelphia, and I got into the hip hop culture as it was becoming a phenomenon in the early '80s. There was quite a few local artists by the names of Steady B, Cool C, Schoolie D, the Fresh Prince, now world known as Will Smith, and a lot of these guys were teenagers, making records in the early '80s, early to mid '80s, and I grew up with that, and it really inspired in me something about having a platform. I remember even as early as 11 years old, kind of thinking that, wow, this is a cool way to be able to get a message out, and uniquely different from singing, because rap music is spoken word essentially, and very explicit, very clear, really no mistaking what the person is saying. So those are some of the things that inspired me to get into making records. And over time, over decades of doing that, I learned some skills that, unbeknownst to myself, were preparing me to organize a bit of a movement in Philadelphia, which led to the founding of Philly Truths. So that's the add-on to what you read. That's how we end up here today.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction.
Yes, sir.
So, you have spent decades in hip hop. How has your understanding of the culture evolved from when you first started to where it is today?
Great question. My understanding at the beginning was based on the origin story of starting up in the Bronx, New York, as a few guys, most notably Kool Herc and Afrika Bambaataa, did two unique things around in a certain time frame. One, on the music side, with Kool Herc, starting the back and forth, or what he called the merry-go-round DJ style, which all DJs in hip hop especially have descended from, that of keeping the break, or keeping the drum break, or keeping the most exciting part of the record going. And that's ultimately what became the foundation of rap music. And then the second, with Afrika Bambaataa, essentially intervening in gang violence by encouraging knowledge of self through the Zulu Nation, and channeling the anger or the frustration into a competitive, creative expression through rapping, through DJing, through dancing. So my origin story is based on that: peace, love, unity, having fun, as the tenets of hip hop. And that hasn't changed for myself and for a lot of others. What has changed is the impact that it has had in the commercialization, and all the business that it has generated has tended to promote, and more heavily promote, certain elements of street culture, of street life, that actually were intended to be counteracted by hip hop. That, of course, being violence, drug dealing, overt misogyny, on and on and on. So, over these past 53 years, I think the only thing that has evolved is actually a kind of devolution is that the broader cultural influence has cost us some of our original intent. So that's what I see the biggest difference between, day one and today.
Okay, so what inspired you to create Philly Truths? And what does sustainable black manhood mean in practical terms?
Absolutely. So Philly Truths came about when in 2020 I returned to my hometown of Philadelphia, and a friend of mine that I went to high school with and I got into a conversation about the level of gun violence and the homicide rate at that time in 2020. And as we were approaching 500 homicides in the city of Philadelphia, we were taken back to a time when we were teenagers. It was 1990 at the height of the crack epidemic. And there was also a big news presence around this 500 homicides number being totally outrageous and totally unacceptable. And we were 30 years later looking at the same thing play out again. And we just decided now as adults that we would do something to, mitigate it if we could. And that was generally the birth of Philly Truths. And there's been a few initiatives over the past few years. The one that has really stuck and helped us find our place in the framework of all the nonprofits here in the city and even the governmental agencies doing work to stem gun violence and stem violence in general is called Peace Patrol. And Peace Patrol is where we hire men, primarily men, who have been incarcerated, who have been impacted by the criminal justice system to now be to engage the community around safety and around self-accountability in our community for our safety. So that's what Philly Truths is day to day. Peace Patrol is Monday through Friday, 6:30 to 10:30 p.m. And we visit blocks that are identified with what we call a block score. We get data from the district attorney's office and we determine block scores, and the blocks with the highest score in terms of gun violence and other violent crime are the blocks that we visit and engage the community around safety. So in practical terms, what is sustainable black manhood is, zero involvement with the criminal justice system, zero involvement with the family court system, which means child support, baby mama, all of that stuff that comes from unplanned paternity. It means always pursuing useful education. That means knowledge of self individually, familial, culturally, and, spiritually, if you want to go that far, but useful education, and is to pursue economic freedom through legal means. So those are the tenets of sustainable black manhood. And how Peace Patrol feeds into that is we are often the first form of employment that some of these guys have coming back from incarceration. While we employ them, we do personal development, whether it's trauma-informed care. So we prepare them to be able to engage the community. And while we are building Peace Patrol to ultimately be its own, sustainable wage employment, we train the men for other sustainable wage employment in the interim. One that we're focused on now is called a certified peer specialist, which is essentially a street level social worker. And our next venture is to get them into the building trades. So this is how we affect our understanding of sustainable black manhood, primarily through the Peace Patrol program.
Okay, so you founded Peace Patrol after returning to Philadelphia.
Yes.
What did you see happening in your community that convinced you action couldn't wait?
Well, it was gun violence. It was violence. It was a strong media presence that was, in my opinion, fear mongering, right? it was kind of turning into, had this element of theater and sport where it was, are we going to get to 500 homicides? Are we going to, it was kind of that. There was always a count. There was like a body count on the news almost every night. And that, and combined with the fact that I had lived through a similar crisis as a teenager, and I understood in that moment that, this is going to be up to people in the community and from the community, because our police department is well resourced, to the tune of $700+ million per year at that time. I think 727, something like that. So when I see these things and I look at all the money that's thrown at it, but I also know experientially that, it's okay for some people, for some segments of the population, if all we do in the African American community is take one another out, right? Some people are okay with that. And so I knew that if there would be a disruption of it, it would have to come from in the community. And I also believe that it is our responsibility first, even though we pay, our taxes for those services, it is first and foremost our responsibility. So that was it. I just felt like something should be done about it, and I felt like we could do something about it, and that was the beginning.
All right. So, many people think music and activism are separate words. How have they always been connected in your life?
Well, so I began my career in the music business around 1998, 99. That's the time when I began to be able to do tours and actually generate an income. Before, I was working up to that. So beginning in 1998, I began to travel. I began to travel across the United States. I began to travel across Europe. And I began to see things, societies operating differently than what I saw in Philadelphia, right? And so I was always kind of making a mental note, because at the time, things are changing a little bit, but at that time in the 80s, 90s, Philadelphia was a kind of place that if you had a aspiration in certain, in entertainment or music, you kind of would have to leave the city to really make it happen. So I was always looking for a way out, and it was other reasons as well, that it was generally felt kind of hopeless there. And so, I brought all of that into my art and into the songs I wrote. I always was kind of aspirational for our people, that we would be, healing ourselves psychologically, economically, just organizationally, that we would be doing better for ourselves. And I always wove those themes into my music. And so, after, 2 decades of writing those kinds of songs, releasing those kinds of songs, performing those songs around the world, and seeing other societies, even in the United States, even, cities being better run, I returned to Philadelphia, and I did not know that this would happen when I returned, but ultimately, every skill that I learned in promoting myself as an artist was everything I needed to establish the identity of the organization and to really boldly position us in this landscape that was really already crowded with a lot of people that were in the space or who had come before us and, proposed different ideas, but for whatever reason didn't stick as well as we did. So, the commonality has always been the mindset that, we are responsible. We deal with big issues, right? We deal with a history of enslavement. We deal with. I'm sorry, we got somebody talking there.
Hi,
Hello.
Larry. I'll
Oh,
be with you. I'll be with you in a few minutes, Larry.
okay.
Yeah, thank you.
So we deal with big issues. We deal with the history and the vestiges and the badges of slavery that remain. We deal with current racism, right? But ultimately, knowing that these forces are out there, that even heightens our responsibility within our community. And so basically, I put those ideas into my music, and I believed them. And so I believed them so much that ultimately I began to act on them. And that's pretty much the thread between the two worlds.
All right, thank you so much. So, for decades now, okay, hip hop has become one of the most influential cultures. Do you think it's fully using its economic and political power?
Absolutely not. That's exactly why I started the conversation on Instagram about consolidating the power of hip hop. If you think about that origin story that I just, recounted, which we all know to be pretty much how it went, it rose up from the streets of the Bronx, New York. And, here we are 53 years later. I'm sure around the globe, but for certain in America, you cannot see any popular advertising, any Fortune 500 company, there's nowhere that our influence is not seen and felt, whether it be the slang, the dress, or just the general disposition and attitude of speaking plainly, bluntly, and explicitly. All of these are artifacts of the hip hop culture moving primarily through rap music out into mainstream America. So that's a great deal of power and a great deal of influence. Now, the second factor that makes it uh, probable, not only possible, is that the African Americans, the descendants of the formerly enslaved in this country, have generally always moved the culture forward. You can go back to the roots of rock and roll with Chuck Berry and Bo Diddley, and even before that, some of the blues men, right? The difference here is that although we have not, how can I say it, preserved all or even close to all of the wealth that it has generated, there has been some wealth captured in our community. So we have a little bit of a different story than rock and roll and than jazz, in that we have actually had some members of our community, some of the artists, some of the ancillary businesses around hip hop have really come out of this with some real generational wealth. So with that, you then have the potential to wield political influence, but you have to do it in an organized way. And my position, I'm not even going to say argument, my position or my hypothesis is that if we have done all of this culturally, right, then with some thought and some intention, and above all else, some organization, we should be able to leverage what we've built. Because one of the most important things that hip hop has accomplished in this country specifically is it has taken a lot of that, what happened during the civil rights movement, to try to take the sting out of race. And it really has given people, an umbrella to stand under that is kind of a lot of times race neutral, ethnicity neutral. But the real caveat to all of that that makes it extra powerful is that it still primarily centers around our expression, right? And for a while, it was dominated by black men. And now we have a lot of sisters in the forefront. But that is a unique position that rock and roll cannot say, that jazz really cannot say, is that we escaped with some of it intact. And so we still have a lot that we can leverage.
Oh, here is my final question for you, Grant.
Yep.
For someone listening right now who wants to make a positive impact in their own community, what's the first step they should take?
That's a great question. I think the first step would be, kind of check in with yourself, with your heart. Are you willing to do what you feel you want to do alone? Meaning, if no one else was to join that cause with you, if no one else was to agree with your position, are you willing to do it alone? At least to start alone. And once you have that clear with yourself, then the first thing I did was to look around and see who actually is already doing similar work to what I feel like I'm being called to do. And I would get with those people and try to have some discussions and understand where is the missing link, or where is the missing piece, where is the niche, or where is the need that I can fulfill. And if I identify a true need that no one else in the space is addressing, then I would look to fill that need, because, a nonprofit is a business, just like a for-profit, and every business that is successful ultimately identifies a need and addresses it. So if you want to get started in community work and community organizing, first you want to check in with your heart if it's going to require lots of time and energy and hours. And if you have a family, you want to talk to them, to your significant other, or to those who would be affected by, you diverting this energy to something outside of the family, outside of the home. And then once you do all those preliminary steps, you just have to find an entry point and go hard and let everything else fall into place. Honestly, if I knew all the steps that I would have to take before I took them, I would have never got started. So I just recommend that you do the most basic self check-in, family check-in, and then check in with the people in the space. And as soon as you find something that really inspires you, you just go hard and you let the rest come to you as you go.
All right, Grant, thank you for sharing your journey and your perspective on hip hop, leadership, and community transformation. If our listeners would like to learn more about Philip Cruz and follow your music or connect with your work, where is the best place for them to find you online?
Absolutely. If you're interested in my music, you can go to Grand Agent on Instagram, and you can also search Grand Agent on any streaming platform. You can also visit Philly Truce on Instagram, or go to phillytruce.com. So, Darlington, I just want to thank you for having me and sharing your platform. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much once again. I really appreciate you for coming, for sharing your insight and your perspective with me and my audience. Thank you so much, Grant.